You all here, and thanks a lot for coming. And tonight, this is probably my favorite talk. I do a lot of talks on different subjects. This is probably my favorite talk because the subject material is so germane to so many people. There are just millions of people on medications throughout the country, getting psychotherapy, doing all kinds of things to get those brains to work better. That really all they need is to work on their brain chemistry, and it's so easy. And so what I'm going to do tonight is to kind of introduce you to that concept. This is actually a two-part lecture, in fact. Tonight I'm going to talk about more of the brain chemistry angle of it, and next time I'm going to talk more about the thoughts, and we'll discuss that in a sec, how that interrelates. But this is the first half. You all have the handout, so we'll just we're going to go right through this, and I'm just going to give you the big picture, and then we're going to kind of break this down into what's actually going on. And before I go, I don't want to forget to say that all this material has been stolen from a woman named Julia Ross, R-O-S-S, Julia Ross, and you can Amazon her and get her book called The Mood Cure. And she's the one that taught me several years ago about this. She's had 30 some odd years in addictions and recovery. And what she had proved to me and has proved to so many people over that time is that the reason most people become addicts versus recreational users, why do some people go through all that self-destructive behavior to get to the substance versus other people that just misuse the substance? The reason is because those people that are addicted, they need it. And the reason they need it is because they can't be normal without it. They have a brain chemistry imbalance, and that drug corrects their imbalance. So as we get towards the tail end of this talk, I'll be talking about how to know what brain chemistry imbalance you might have by what drug makes you feel better. That's one of the major clues you can get. But her name is Julia Ross. The book is called The Mood Cure, and if you want to learn more about this, that would be the book to get. The first topic is, or the first bullet is, your brain chemistry controls how your brain works. The second one is, your brain chemistry is determined by two things: your thoughts, which are really determined about what you believe, your belief systems about life, and that's next time's lecture. How you can look at how you can discover your belief systems. Everything you think about comes from a belief system. If you believe the world is round, you're going to think one way about traveling. If you believe the world is flat, you're going to think another way about traveling. And it's really quite as simple as that. If you don't like the way you're feeling, look at the way you're believing. And that's next time. But the second thing that determines your thoughts is your biochemical balance. And your thoughts determine your biochemical balance. Your biochemical imbalance determines your thoughts. So it goes both ways. So the more depressed you get, the more imbalanced your brain chemistry gets, and the more depressed you get. And who knows what came first? You don't always know. But that's how it starts off. And then we're going to talk about the various factors that influence brain chemistry balance. So let's just start with the first bullet. Your brain chemistry controls how your brain works. Your brain's like a computer, right? And it's got one part over here that does one thing, another part over here that does another. They have to talk to each other. They have to communicate with each other. But it's not a hardwired computer. There aren't any actual wires going across it. It's a soggy, wet computer. And the way this can talk to this with discretion is how these brain chemicals interact with one cell, and then in a domino kind of affect the next cell and the next cell and the next cell. So this whole thing talks with various chemical mediators. And we're going to look primarily at 4 of them tonight, but there are also some other factors we're going to talk about. But I think that's the first thing to realize is this is a soggy computer. Your brain chemistry is determined by your thoughts, which is determined by your beliefs about life, and your biochemical balance. Tonight we'll focus on biochemical balance. Every one of us is born genetically different. There's no 2 people the same. Even identical twins aren't absolutely identical in every single way. So we all come into this world with a certain amount of the factors I'm going to talk about. Anywhere from B12 and how much B12 your body needs, to how much testosterone your body needs, to how many of these brain chemicals your body needs. It's all different with everybody. Now, as we get older, all of it gets lower. All right? I don't care what it is you're looking at. If you're looking at B12 levels, if you're looking at amino acid levels, if you're looking at hormones, as you get older, it doesn't get higher, right? It gets lower. So think of this. Depending on where you started off, at some point in your life, you're going to start running depleted. Now, if you started off real low with certain brain chemicals, by the time you reach your 40s or 50s, you could be in a depletion level. Correspondingly, if you start off real high, you might be in your 80s before you reach a depletion level. And this is really important to understand, especially when you look at depression and anxiety. And it's very simple to grasp this when you see a graph of the incidence of depression and anxiety as it occurs relative to age. Right? So that you'll see that the incidence is really quite low in depression and anxiety in the general population until around the age of 45, 50. And then it starts to sneak up, and starting around the age of 60, it soars. Now you've got to ask yourself a question, well, is that because by the time people get to be 60, they're have not figured out anything, they're confused, they're depressed? Not really. I mean, the older you get, the more life experience you have, the more you understand how the system works. It should be the less. It should be, you should be depressed when you're young. And, with all the stresses and the pressures on you to prove yourself and go do this and make your money. By the time you reach your golden years, everything's settled down and you know your way around the world, you got some confidence in yourself, you should see the incidence of anxiety and depression go down, but they don't. They actually start to escalate, which in my viewpoint is proof positive that what's starting all this is depletions of something. And of course, we're going to address those depletions. Okay, let's go take right off on that. It says your biochemical balance is determined, and then I list quite a few things to pay attention to. One is called neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters refer to the various brain chemicals that make that soggy computer work. We're going to focus on 4 of them, because 4 of them almost tell you the whole tale. The next thing is hormones. Hormones and neurotransmitters really work very closely together, such that if a neurotransmitter is going to work in that soggy brain, it needs the hormone around to do it. We call this, in endocrinology, we'll call this a permissive effect, so that one chemical permits another one to work. This one can be in plenty, you can have plenty of that chemical present, but if this one isn't present, it can't work. We call that a permissive effect. Hormones and brain chemicals, neurotransmitters, are very much aligned permissively. So women, the classical neurotransmitter for a woman is serotonin. We're going to talk more about this, okay? The classical hormone for women is estrogen. Guess which 2 talk to each other quite a bit. If you're deficient in estrogen, your serotonin won't work. If you're deficient in serotonin, your estrogen won't work, at least in your brain. So it's important to understand that even though this talk is going to focus on neurotransmitters and the serotonins and such, that without balancing those hormones, and you probably know I'm an advocate of balancing hormones. So as men or women get older and their hormone levels go down, I'm into replacing them and bringing their hormone levels up to what was normal for them in their life. And this will help their brain chemistry and help their neurotransmitters. One of the biggest mistakes I think that people make in trying to balance brain chemistry is forgetting the action of hormones. Now with young people, you don't really need to do that so much. But in the over 50 crowd, this becomes more of an issue. So we've got neurotransmitters, hormones, intestinal toxicity. I'm going to spend zero time talking about that tonight, but I do want to mention that autism is a brain chemistry disorder that primarily is caused by toxicity in the intestines. Fix the intestines, autism almost always goes away, and along with a lot of learning disorders and dyslexia. So that's a dramatic example of the toxins that are formed in your gut that get in your bloodstream and go to your brain, which just happens to be sensitive to those toxins. In the same way that if I give everybody in this room the same drug, you know, some people are going to have one effect, another people are going to have another effect, you guys are going to have your effect. That drug will affect everybody differently because we're all unique. Same drug, but different reactions because we're all unique. Same thing happens with intestinal toxicity. Autistic kids have a sensitivity to certain of these toxins. Clean out their colon, they get better. But that's all I'm going to mention about that. Then there's heavy metals. Heavy metals would be cadmium, lead, arsenic, mercury, various toxins in the environment. And we all know that they're there. We know that if you look at cadaver levels of metals that in bodies they dig up from the 1800s, compare them to what exists today in cadavers, you find there's almost a 200-fold increase in lead, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic in the bones of people today as there were 100 years ago. So these things can dramatically affect the way neurotransmitters work. In fact, mercury binds up what we call methyl groups to the extent that very often those methyl groups don't work so well. Now, why is that important? That's important because every single neurotransmitter that works depends on methyl groups. No methyl groups can't work. Mercury binds up methyl groups. Autistic kids cannot detoxify mercury. And that's why I'm so much against giving children vaccines that contain thimerosal or mercury, because you're going to make a fair number of them autistic by doing that. But heavy metals are also something that we want to pay a little bit of attention to. Again, not going to talk about tonight, just want to mention it. Food allergies, again, in the same way that the same drug affects everybody differently, this is also true for foods. So that, you know, this person over here can thrive on milk, this person over here gets a rash or a headache if they have milk. And the same thing can happen with depression. Don't think that you can't have reactions in your brain that result in emotional symptoms in the same way you can get a headache or a vertigo or something else from eating the food. Same thing can happen. Sugar and simple carbs. Now, sugar and carbs play an enormous role here, and because that's one of the drugs. Now, I'll skip just ahead to just tease you a little bit because that's the major drug for women, is sugar and carbs. Why? As you'll see, it stimulates the major neurotransmitter for women called serotonin. Problem is, as you keep self-medicating with the sugar and the carbs, there's an antagonistic effect that occurs where your serotonin actually goes down after you keep doing that. And so what do you got to do? Eat more carbs. And you keep going on and on with this. So sugar and carbohydrates are a major issue for women. B vitamins. We do test for vitamin status in people, and we know that approximately 20% of people over the age of 60 are deficient in one or more B vitamins. That's not because they eat poorly. I mean, people over the age of 60 almost always eat better than people under the age of 30. Almost always. Why? Because they've learned real quickly, if I don't eat right, I don't feel so well. I can't get away with it like I used to be able to get away with it. And so despite better eating habits, there's a large amount of B vitamin deficiency in the over 60 crowd. And why is that? It's because they can't absorb it. They can't absorb it. So when you don't have those B vitamins, the neurotransmitters don't work. They all require B vitamins. So that's one thing that I learned very early on. In fact, when I got into this field 37 years ago, one of the first things I started to do, I didn't know anything else. I read a book called Sugar Blues. I basically took everybody off sugar and gave them B-complex vitamin pill. That was it. That was the sum total of my knowledge. And about 50% of my people got well. It's pretty amazing. So sometimes it's very simple. Sleep. We live in a sleep-deprived culture. Very often it's self-induced. You know, I don't want to go to sleep. I want to watch the Tonight Show, or I want to stay up and go do something, or I'm reading this book or something. But a lot of it is due to neurotransmitter deficiencies. And again, another vicious cycle. Your neurotransmitters, we'll talk about the one that controls sleep, but one of them controls sleep. If you don't have enough of those neurotransmitters, you don't sleep. You don't sleep, you can't make the neurotransmitters, because that's where they're made, when you're asleep. A lot of people think sleep is a time when nothing's happening. It's sort of downtime. The computer is resting. It's actually turned off. Not much is going on, but you need to kind of rest it every now and then or it'll burn out. That's not actually true. What is going on in sleep is a lot of restorative functions, particularly in the brain. And there are quite a number of research studies out there that show that babies who don't get an adequate amount of sleep have lower IQs, for example. And that's why it's so important for kids to get sleep, and that's why they'll sleep like 10, 12 hours a day. Without that, their brains will not develop adequately. Now, as we get older and our brains have matured and developed more, we don't need sleep like they did, okay? But we still need a lot of sleep. You need in the order of a minimum, absolutely totally dead minimum 6 hours. If you're not getting 6 hours of sleep, and I mean sleep, not laying in the bed, but actually sleeping, you're under your minimum. Optimum for most people is around 8 hours. Okay? So hit the sack early. Another thing that can determine your biochemical imbalance is medications. So as you'll see, one of the class of medications is called SSRIs. They're used by women all over this country. I believe it's the biggest selling medication in the world. Billions of dollars spent on SSRIs, Wellbutrin, Prozac, Paxil, Zoloft, all these are SSRIs. Pardon? Lexapro, yeah. Now there's various versions of them, but they all have an SSRI capability. Why is that? Why is it that 80% of those drugs are used by women? I'm here to tell you. It's because women's estrogen levels take a nosedive, whereas men's testosterone levels don't. And that's the big reason why most of the people that use those drugs are women. Quite simply, if our testosterone levels took a dive like you guys' estrogen levels go down, we'd be sucking down Prozacs too. The ironic thing is, as you take the medications, the problem you're treating actually gets worse. And so we're going to discuss a little bit about how taking SSRIs, which are supposed to improve serotonin metabolism, actually deplete you of serotonin as you continue to take them, which is why it's so hard to get off them. Now, from our perspective, that's a pretty dumb idea, but from the pharmaceutical company's perspective, that's pretty smart. That works out just fine. So various recreational drugs, and of course the medications that the doctors may give you, including blood pressure medications and medications to cut back heartburn, and lots of medications that you use can, in your particular brain, cause one of these imbalances. Not in everybody, but maybe in you. And then finally alcohol, and I should have put down coffee in here because we'll talk a little bit about coffee too. So those are all the kinds of things that a physician needs to look at when he's evaluating, why is this person depressed? We know when you come in the office, automatically, I know for sure you're not depressed because you have a Prozac deficiency. So I know if I give you Prozac, I'm not treating the cause. I'm just, sweeping the dirt underneath the rug while the problem continues to escalate. But what I want to know is, why are you depressed? Why do you have ADHD? Why can't you concentrate? Why can't you focus? Why can't you sleep? Why are you anxious? Why do you actually have panic attacks? I want to know why all that is. And in doing that, I'm going to kind of go through these things that we just talked about and see what is working in you. Tonight we're going to focus mostly on just the hormones and the neurotransmitters, because those are the big players. If I just had two things to pick on, I would pick on those and be right 95% of the time. Okay, let's just tag on the hormones at first here. First group of hormones is thyroid hormones. Now there are two thyroid hormones. One's called T3, one's called T4. The difference between T3 and T4 is T3 has 3 iodine molecules on it, and T4 has 4 iodines on it. That's the only difference. So if you took T4 and you took an iodine atom off, what do you have? You got T3. T4 doesn't work, doesn't do anything in your body. T3 does everything in your body. So you might say, well, why does the body make T4 if it doesn't do anything? And the reason is because the body does this all the time with hormones. It'll make them and put them in an inactive form. So they're constantly circulating through your body. You have this big reservoir of hormones that don't actually do anything until you do something to activate them. In this case, you have a body that's circulating all this T4. Now suppose I go lift a weight like this with my right hand. Thyroid is what stimulates your body to produce energy. Which is going to need more energy, my right hand or my left hand that's just laying there doing nothing? It's my right hand, right? So it wouldn't be inappropriate for the body to make the whole amount of thyroid for the whole body. It's just, well, how do I get a lot of thyroid in the right hand? Well, it's pretty cool, because what's going to happen is all the T4 that's in my right arm will immediately be converted to T3, and everybody's happy. So I maintain a balance. This goes on nanoseconds by nanoseconds all the time. Your body is self-regulating itself. It's pretty absolutely astounding when you start to think of the soggy computer doing this. And again, when you think about it that way, you start to have a sense for, that could be pretty vulnerable. This system could be pretty vulnerable. If I drop a little chemical in there, maybe I'm going to like goof that system up a little bit. Thyroid hormones are the hormones, namely T3, that stimulate your cells to do what they do. If it's a muscle cell without thyroid hormone, it's not going to contract. If it's a digestion cell without thyroid hormone, it's not going to make a digestion enzyme. If it's a brain cell without thyroid hormone, it won't make a neurotransmitter. Or if it gets exposed to a neurotransmitter, it won't react to it. So thyroid hormone is absolutely critical for brain function. The primary, at least statistically, most notable cause for dementia in the elderly in nursing homes is undiagnosed low thyroid function. So as we get older and our brains don't work so well anyway, and as our thyroid hormones go down, we will get to the point where we probably can't even remember who we are. That's how influential thyroid hormone is. Now, it is possible to have a low level of thyroid hormone when you're just 3 years old. That's very possible. It's not that unusual. But it becomes more common as you get older. So normally we don't see statistically, thyroid hormone being much of a deficiency until people hit their 16, 17, 18 years old. Certainly by the time that you're age 50, I would say approximately 100% of the population has low thyroid hormone function. Now, I would differ with other physicians on this. Most physicians do not understand it the way I understand it. I think most physicians rely on blood tests of thyroid hormones. So there are a number of blood tests, and they consider these blood tests to be pretty accurate in diagnosing low thyroid function. And the truth is that they are very poor at diagnosing low thyroid function. They're very insensitive. So your thyroid has to be quite significantly depressed before it's going to show up on that blood test. We do a metabolic testing here. A lot of you guys have had that testing, where we actually test your metabolism. Thyroid hormone is the stimulator for metabolism. So when your metabolism is low, even though your thyroid hormone levels on the blood test fall within range, you've got a thyroid problem in my book. And so over the years I've learned when I give you thyroid, again, even though the thyroid blood tests are in range, patient gets better. If I were to take them off thyroid, and a lot of times that happens, I'll treat the patient and they get better and they go see another physician that's not familiar with this and he says, oh, you don't need thyroid, takes them off thyroid and they get worse. And it's, it's important when you think about hormones and tests for hormones, it's kind of important to understand that the range for hormones, if you ever look at that range, they call that the normal range. By the way, normal range doesn't mean if you're not in it, you're abnormal. Okay? So it doesn't, what it means is a statistical number. It means if you go out and statistically grab a sample of people, 96% of them are going to fall in that range. 2% are going to be normal and above the range. Another 2% are going to be normal and below the range. So it is quite possible to have a very high or very low level of a hormone and that be normal for you. But most of the time, statistically, you're supposed to be in this range. But the range is enormous. For example, the range for testosterone goes from 250 to 1,000. That's a factor of 4. Now, what if you're a 900 guy, a 900 testosterone guy, and the doctor checks your level, and you're a 300. You're a 300 now. You're 1/3 of what you used to have. Again, your brain needs testosterone to maintain mood. A major cause for depression in men is low testosterone. It's underdiagnosed because we don't crash like ladies do. You guys, it's pretty easy to figure it out. You know, in the space of about 12 months, you go bonkers. But we go bonkers over a space of about 15 years. And it's hard to see that and to know that. But when our testosterone levels, say we're a 900 guy and goes to 300, that's 1/3 of what it used to be, but they're both in range. So you can't make a lot of sense out of blood levels. You really want to diagnose hormone deficiencies, you want to look at the symptoms. Now, fortunately, that's pretty easy to do. You just go get a textbook out, haul it up, it says, there's the symptoms for that hormone. You ask the guy, do you have that? Yeah, I got that. All right, let's give you some hormone, see what happens. And you give the hormone, he gets better. That's the way to diagnose it, not by looking at lab tests. So I diverged a little bit there, but this is a little bit of an issue for me on the thyroid hormones. I believe this is grossly underdiagnosed. I believe that a lot of people who should be on thyroid hormone are not. A couple of the clues, now you could just Google thyroid hormone symptoms and you can come up with a lot of symptoms because, again, not one cell in your body can do anything without thyroid hormone. It's sort of like how good are the lights in my room here if the light switch is off. That's the kind of role that thyroid hormone plays. So you can bet that because of all the genetic variation there is, you lower everybody in this room, we lower our thyroid hormone levels, we'll have like a whole host of different symptoms. The most common is fatigue. Headaches are extremely common. Menstrual disorders in women, acne, dry skin, poor fingernails, hair loss, mood disorders, can't think clearly, ADD, weight gain is something you commonly see, constipation, digestive disturbances, and the list goes on and on and on and on. So almost anybody qualifies for thyroid hormones, right? Especially over the age of 50. And that's why I say there aren't that many people over the age of 50 that don't require thyroid hormones in order to get them back to what their body was used to as a younger person. The next hormones are even more misunderstood, I think, than thyroid hormones, and that's adrenal hormones. Adrenal hormones are namely 2. Now, there are a bunch of them, but namely we're looking at 2. One's called DHEA. The other one's called cortisol. These are incredibly important hormones. These are your stress hormones. So that when your system is stressed, your body makes these hormones to respond to the stress. Now, when I say the word stress, most people think I'm talking about, worrying or being upset over something, but I'm not really in this context. I'm talking about anything that impinges upon your system. It could be it's cold out. That's stressful. It could be that you're not getting enough sunlight. That's stressful. It could be you're getting too much sunlight. That's stressful. Allergies are stressful. Not enough sleep, stressful. There's a lot of too much stresses. Too much partying, too much exercise, too much coffee, too much alcohol. This is all stressful. So anything that impacts on my pain is stressful, right? Viruses are stressful. Bacteria are stressful. Any of that stuff. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about stuff that happens all the time that impacts upon my system. My body says, don't worry, Frank. You're going to be okay. We're going to pump out cortisol, DHEA. They're going to neutralize the effect of the stress on your body, and you're going to be just fine. Except what happens is we live in a very stressful time. And I'm not, again, the amount of a mental and emotional stress I think we have now must be many times more than they had 100 years ago. But leaving that aside, we live in a polluted universe that wasn't here 100 years ago. We can't find pure water. We can't find pure food. We can't find pure air. We're in my office here. I've got outgassing of the carpets, I've got fluorescent lights. Of course, they're full spectrum, but they're still stressful. They're not perfect. And so it's impossible. Well, you got cell phone towers. Now, whether you have a cell phone or not, you're getting blasted with the cell phone towers. You've got satellites beaming stuff all over the place. My house is probably like a lot of people's houses, 24-hour internet on there. Where's that wireless? Where's that going? All of this is stressful to my system. So, but again, my system says, don't worry, Frank, everything's okay. You're going to make some cortisol, you're going to make some DHEA, counteract stress, everything's going to be just fine. Except that after a while, my system just gets worn out. Now I know you guys don't do this anymore, but remember when you were in college and you maybe went to too many parties or stayed up too late, too many days in a row, and you kind of sort of got pooped out? That's your adrenals. You ran out of cortisol. That's what that was. What did you need to do? You need to like go someplace and get enough sleep for about 2 days, and you're back in shape again. Your adrenals will replenish, and they're busy to make more cortisol. So this is a phenomenon that is so much of a factor in most people. In fact, I have a standing sort of rhetorical joke that I use at my seminars when I teach doctors how to do this kind of stuff. And that is, how do you know that your patient needs adrenal hormones? The answer is, they're in your office. Because until they're run out of those adrenal hormones, they feel like everything's okay. Why go see a doctor? But as soon as you run low on those, you're going to want to see a doctor. They're very influential for brain chemistry. Okay, again, the hormones DHEA and cortisol. So we got T3, we got T4, we got DHEA, we got cortisol so far. I mentioned the sex hormones, especially for women. These are just enormously important for brain function. A lot of women can relate to this. They know that when their estrogen levels are low, they get emotional, they have a hard time focusing, a difficulty recalling, difficulty concentrating on the topic, and they know that their brains just are not so sharp. And maybe they can keep working, but they're not as sharp as they used to be. And if you combine that with the deficiency of some thyroid, a little deficiency of adrenal, and then some neurotransmitter deficiency, you can see what stacks up in certain susceptible individuals is the tendency to have decreased brain function. So major hormone for women, going to be estrogen and progesterone. Major hormone for men, of course, is testosterone. Now, women, you guys need testosterone too. It's very important for you. And men need a little bit of progesterone, not much. And then there are some other sex hormones. But those are predominantly the biggest sex hormones and the most important sex hormones to look at. And very often, if someone were to try this to cure their depression and it didn't work, and they're not using hormones, that could very likely be the cause. The fourth hormone listed is growth hormone. I think the first three that I just talked about are much more influential than growth hormone is. But it's something to think about when you're doing everything and you realize, well, geez, maybe we're not quite getting the result we want. It could be due to growth hormone. But that's not all that common. Now, the last one here, melatonin, is one that makes a big difference, particularly, again, for women. When you're deficient on melatonin, a good characteristic to recognize this with is you don't sleep well. You will fall asleep, but then 3-4 hours later you will wake up and you will be restless and difficult to fall back to sleep. Now, how many people have experienced what I'm talking about? Probably half, okay, not quite half, but I'm surprised. I would normally, if I ask that question, I'm going to get like 80% of people know exactly what I'm talking about because I hear this all the time. That is a good sign that you're having a melatonin deficiency. You can buy melatonin over the counter. It won't really cure your depression, but the point I'm making here is that if you do have a brain function disorder and you're deficient in melatonin and you don't take it, that might make it difficult for you to get the kind of results you want to get. So always think about melatonin. If you sleep really well straight through the night, you probably don't need it. Incidentally, I should mention melatonin is a very important hormone for the immune system, such that a deficiency puts you at risk for breast cancer and for men, prostate cancer. So a lot of people think of melatonin as being a sleep hormone, but I want you to also think more about it. There's more going on there with the immune system than that. Now we're getting down to the major stuff here, which is the neurotransmitters, the actual brain chemicals. As I mentioned, there are 4 of them. First one's called serotonin. Serotonin. That is the primary brain chemical for ladies. And the SSRI drugs, the Prozacs, the Paxils, all those drugs, what they do is they enhance the way serotonin works. And I'm going to come back and discuss that in a sec. The second neurotransmitter is the one that's primary for men. This is called the catecholamines / dopamine / norepinephrine. Now, if you don't want to remember all those words, you could just remember dopamine. So dopamine, they're all variations of dopamine, what I just said. Okay, so Dopamine is the main neurotransmitter for men. Does that mean that ladies can't have a need for dopamine? No. It just means that statistically speaking, if you're a woman and you're having a brain dysfunction thing, I'm thinking serotonin, and I'm going for that first. And now, if you also have symptoms suggestive of a dopamine deficiency, we're going to talk about how you diagnose this in just a second, then I'll give you something to help you with the dopamine too. But dopamine's the main one for men. Third one here is called GABA, G-A-B-A, gamma-aminobutyric acid. GABA is a calming neurotransmitter. It will calm you down. So that's primarily implicated in anxiety disorders. You know, if you just heard something worrisome and you got anxious, you wouldn't think much about it. But what if you're like anxious all the time? You have this anxious, tense feeling all the time, regardless of what's going on. And maybe most of us know what we're talking about. It's kind of, if you ever drank too much coffee, it's kind of like that. You feel tense and everything, and it's just a chemical kind of tension. That's what it's like when you don't have enough GABA on board. So that's not a sexual one. You can, men or women, equal opportunity employer for GABA. And then the last one is the endorphins. The endorphins are the ones that help prevent you from becoming overwhelmed. People that are deficient in their endorphins are, number one, very sensitive. That's what you want to think. If you know anybody that's so sensitive, you know, they can't look at something on the TV with the least little bit of trauma, or they're in tears and they can't take it, or if you give them more than a minimal number of tasks to do, they're overwhelmed. Or if they're just very sensitive to pain, the least little pain, and they're just, you know, it's overwhelming to them. That kind of sensitivity is typically due to a lack of adequate endorphins. Now, endorphins are the ones that drug addicts, the opiate drug addicts use. So the people that take down pain medications and such like that, and we'll talk about this in a second. Heroin users, such like that, they're low on endorphins. And without their heroin, life is absolutely, utterly overwhelming to them. And everything's painful to them. Painful from an emotional standpoint, painful from a physical standpoint. And heroin just makes it all fine. And there's no way you can get them off heroin. They'd much rather be on heroin and suffer the indignities and the side effects of being on heroin than suffer what's even worse yet, and that is to be without endorphins. The good news, however, of course, is you can boost your own endorphins. And we'll talk a little bit about that in come. But those are the four ones to think of. Serotonin, mood disorders, primarily for women. Dopamine and the catecholamines, mood disorders primarily for men. GABA is anxiety, restlessness, can't relax. And endorphins, sensitivity. Sensitivity to mental, emotional pressures and to physical pressures. So how do you know which one you have? Well, already you might be starting to get an idea of how to start diagnosing yourself. But you can get even more specific. Specifically, if you look at your symptoms, and we just kind of went through those, that gives you a clue. So if you're more of a restless, fidgety person, and you're kind of moody, and you're a woman, you're thinking, I probably need some GABA and some serotonin. If you're a man, when men get depressed, we have a different version of depression than ladies do. Our depression is more of a disinterest. Okay, so what characterizes the male sex is getting passionate over things. You get drive. I'm going to go out and I'm going to build the bridge. I'm going to attack the enemy. But I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do something. I've got all this drive, all this passion. I'm going to go out there and do that. That's a male kind of phenomenon, and that's due to our neurotransmitters. And you know, it's a funny thing, but what boosts those neurotransmitters is excitement. So that's why we drive too fast, right? And that's why you're sitting over there getting white knuckles while your husband's driving the car, and you think, slow down, and the husband thinking, oh, this is just fine, you know. And that's because we're bumping up our dopamine levels. It's good for us. We like it. We like excitement. We like danger to a certain amount. But we like that. It bumps up dopamine levels. Now, when our dopamine levels are deficient from too much of that, we used it all up, so to speak, then we become depressed. And our depression is kind of like a disinterest in things. All of a sudden, I don't care about the elections. I'm sick of the elections. I'm sick of all of them. I don't even do that. Well, honey, how come you're not playing golf anymore? The same guy used to play golf 4 times a week, hasn't touched a golf club in the last 4 weeks. Something's going on. I don't want to go to work anymore. I don't care about work. It's stupid. Those are the kinds of things that's the kind of depression men have. That's different from ladies. Ladies have more of a sad depression, a melancholy depression. Ladies want to be, they don't want to be so withdrawn. Men, we just want to go off in a room and shut the door and just complain about things. Women more want to get hugs or get reinforcement or go play with children or something like that. Why? Because hugs and soft cuddliness and all that kind of things bumps up serotonin levels. Serotonin doesn't do guys a lot of good. So we don't care as much about that. We want to go drive our car fast versus you don't want to drive the car fast. It's going to do nothing for you. But that's how you can kind of diagnose a depression in a man. It's very different. We don't typically run around crying or being sad or mopey. We just tend to lose our interest in the things that would normally give us a lot of drive and passion. So that kind of goes to the symptoms part. The next part is, what are your favorite medications? Now this is where it starts to get a little bit fun. So for serotonin, the major medications are the SSRI drugs. So if I have a lady that comes in to see me and say, well, I'm chronically depressed, and I say, well, did you ever try one of these drugs? And she says, yes. And she might already be on one. And I say, did it work? And she says, yes. Bingo. I don't even have to go any further than that. But I could then ask her, well, do you have a penchant for sugar and chocolate and sweets and warm bread? Do you like all that kind of stuff? Yes. I mean, the diagnosis is nailed down at that point. We just need to give this poor woman some serotonin. So serotonin, the favorite medications are SSRIs, sugar and carbs, and hugs. Okay, that boosts up serotonin level. Okay, for catecholamines, this is the male one now. The dopamine one is the male one. What gets us going, what bumps up our dopamine levels is excitement, coffee, and stimulants. So to this extent, alcohol can be a stimulant. So that's why guys tend to want to suck down the alcohol more than women do, as a general rule. We like cigarettes typically more than women because that's a stimulant drug. We certainly like our coffee. I'm not saying that ladies don't, but I can tell you one thing, the ladies are going to be having it with sugar. You know, they're going to have the sugar, cream, warm, cozy thing, and they're going to hold a cup like this. And the guys are going to just be slamming down the black stuff, as fast as we can. But those are the ways to look at your medications to find out what you need that way. Now, GABA, again, that's the one where you're jittery and you're tense and you need something to calm you down. So that's the tranquilizers. So somebody says, well, a lady comes in and says, I'm depressed and I'm on Xanax or I'm on Ativan or one of the tranquilizers that comes. Then I know, I'm thinking, probably need some GABA now. Is it possible to need all 4? Yes. It's not likely, but very commonly we need 2. Very commonly. And for probably the most common would be for women, serotonin and GABA, and for men, dopamine and GABA, probably the most common. So tranquilizers, marijuana is for many people anyhow, can be used to calm down, make up for GABA, lack of GABA. Now GABA is relaxing, so marijuana can relax you. So if you say, yeah, when I was in college, I used to smoke marijuana all the time, it really calmed me down. Of course, I don't do that anymore because I'm over that. But it really did help me, and I really did like it. That's a good clue. That's a good clue to me. And then finally, there's a medication I'll call Neurontin. Neurontin is a very good medication. I'm only into medications as a last resort, but I will tell you it's a very good one because what Neurontin does specifically is activate GABA sites. So it's probably the most powerful GABA medication. So if you're, and I will sometimes do this as a test. So I can have a person come in and say, well, I'm feeling very tense all the time, and I'll say, well, okay, I'm going to give you some Neurontin, and let's see how it works. If they call me up after 2 weeks and say, this stuff is great, this is really making it work for me, I love this stuff, then I know they need some GABA help. And then we go about to do it naturally without using the medication. But Neurontin's a good clue or good sign that you need GABA. And finally, on the endorphins, that's the narcotics. I don't see a lot of this. I know a lot of it exists. In my world here in Carson City, it's more the other ones, but certainly, and when you're low on endorphins, it's the Vicodins, it's the codeines, it's the Demerols, it's those kinds of things really help you out a lot. By the way, you can also stimulate endorphins by exercise, right? So that we know that, if I have somebody come in to see me and they run for 2 hours every day of their life, there are people like that, by the way, I'm thinking they probably have an endorphin deficiency. Who would want to run for 2 hours a day? But so I'm thinking that way anyhow. And some people, in fact, will say, well, if I don't run, I just, life isn't worth living. I've heard that before. Okay, so that's how you figure it out. So now, once you figured it out, and once you say, okay, I pretty much know what my situation is, then what do you do about it? Well, let's start off with serotonin. I'm going to take a little bit of time to go in particular and discuss serotonin because I think it's very interesting. When you're deficient on serotonin, you become depressed. You usually develop insomnia. You sleep very restless. You have a strong affinity for carbs and sugar in particular. And every time you eat sugar, it will raise your serotonin levels. Except the more sugar you eat, that sensitivity actually becomes less and less. So whereas you could eat, say, half a candy bar and will bump your serotonin levels up this much, you're going to find out that down the line, it's going to take a whole candy bar. Then it's going to take a candy bar and a half to get the same bump on the serotonin. And then finally, you're going to reach a point where you could eat candy bars all day long. You're not getting any more serotonin out of that, and they actually start going down. Serotonin levels have a contradictory effect to the tune that they will literally go down as you abuse them. This is true for all the neurotransmitters, by the way. So if you're taking marijuana, or if you're taking alcohol, or if you're taking coffee to create imbalance in your system, to bring about a nice balance in your system, and you take that substance for the first time and you say, my goodness, this is pretty nice. I like this. This makes me feel sort of like I think I'm supposed to feel. Unfortunately, it's not a good solution because what's going to happen is you're going to need to use more and more. You will max out on it, and then the dopamine levels actually go down again. And now you're in a world of hurt because now you got this substance over here you're taking all the time, and you still got the problems come back. SSRI drugs are like that. So let me tell you a little bit of how an SSRI drug works so you have a sense for this, because it seems a little contradictory at first. In your soggy computer, when one nerve cell wants to talk to the other using serotonin, it releases serotonin from the end of the nerve cell to interact with the next nerve cell, kind of like a domino effect. Once that serotonin goes over to that nerve cell and activates it, this nerve cell, in turn, releases its serotonin and to the next nerve cell. After that serotonin activates the nerve cell, it goes back to its original cell to wait for the next impulse. Okay? So it's just kind of a messenger thing in the soggy computer going back and forth. When people get depleted of serotonin, now what would make them depleted? Well, you're probably starting to have a little bit of an idea. Not enough sleep, too much stress, too much sugar, too much coffee. You've heard the term post-traumatic stress syndrome. Well, that's, in a sense, that's probably what we could use. If we needed to find a term, that would mean where some stress impacted you so much that it wore out your neurotransmitters so badly that they never actually recovered. And you are permanently like this. I saw a lady the other day who had a very terrible thing happen 8 years ago and has been depressed ever since. And I know for sure she's over that thing. She's resolved that psychologically. But she still has this post-traumatic stress disorder where her chemistry never resolved it. Her thoughts resolved it, but not her chemistry. So this is a very real phenomenon. Something's going to come along and stress you enough, whether it's an environmental stress, an illness, an accident, say a motorcycle accident or something, I've seen that before, or certainly an emotional stress is going to stress you out so much, your sagging neurotransmitter levels go down below the point of no return, they don't come back. So if it's serotonin, now you don't have that enough serotonin in that nerve cell to go over and make that next cell activate, okay? So what the drugs do, when your serotonin goes over to activate it and then comes back to go to back to the cell, what happens is the drugs interfere with that. They won't let it go back to that cell. They make it stay in the middle. Now, why is that good? Because functionally speaking, that increases the amount of serotonin that's causing an activation. So you're depressed, you don't have any serotonin, you take the drug and voila. 7-10 days later, all of a sudden, you're like a new person. This is the problem, however. Since that drug since serotonin never gets retaken up into the old cell, guess what the old cell gets depleted of? Serotonin. So it's ironic. Even though you have plenty of serotonin in the nerve gap where it's used, you have none in the cells over time. You stop taking that drug, you will crash. Now, some people will actually commit suicide. Some people will end up in the hospitals with psychosis when they withdraw from the drug. Most people just get miserable and start taking it again. Now, it is possible to correct the problem. So to build up the serotonin levels in the nerve and then wean them off the medication. And then you've actually cured the problem. They're not on the drug anymore. And that's a very easy thing to do. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, you look at what's the cause. And as I said, a lot of times this is due to a big stressful emotional event that happened in the past that has not been resolved, in which case next time's talk will deal with that, your thoughts and your psychology. And for those of you that are interested, that talk is going to be on basically centering around the work of a woman by the name of Byron Katie. And her book is Loving What Is. So if you want to get a jump start on that, that's an absolutely awesome book. But a lot of the times, you've resolved the mental and emotional stress. You haven't resolved the biochemical implications of it. So to treat serotonin, you are going to get rid of the causes. So you're going to make sure you get plenty of sleep. If you need the hormones, you're going to get the hormones. If you need the B vitamins, you're going to get the B vitamins. Remember my thing about off sugar, take a B complex. You're going to be off sugar and take a B complex. You're going to be off the carbs, pretty much go on a Zone or an Atkins type of diet for a while. Will you like it? No, you won't like it, because you have grown so accustomed, to having that sugar or that carb there to make you feel good. It's sort of like taking a cigarette away from somebody that's used to that cigarette making them feel good. You're not going to like it. But if you stay with this, once your serotonin levels get back to normal, you're going to be like the old person that you used to be, or maybe the person you never were. I will remember very vividly a lady that I saw who was something like 53 years old. And I finally saw her after several months of follow-up. She came in. I said, "How you doing?" She says, "I'm doing absolutely great. I've never felt this good before." And she starts sobbing. I said, "What's up with that? Why are you sobbing?" She said, "You never felt this good." She said, "I just realized it. I have never felt this good before my entire life." And that makes me sad to think about that. And that's why she was crying. So some people go through their whole lives and never even actually realize that they do have such an imbalance. They maybe were born that way, or it started at a very early age, and they never fully appreciated it. So you look for the causes and correct the causes, the sleeps, the B vitamins, et cetera, get them off the sugar, off the carbs, and then there's two magic little pills that you take. One's called 5-HTP, stands for 5-hydroxytryptophan, 5-HTP. You can buy this over the counter. The other one is L-tryptophan, Also, you can buy it over the counter. I like 5-HTP better. It works a lot better for 90% of people, but there are those 10% where 5-HTP will aggravate their gut, give them some diarrhea or give them some stomach pains. And so for that 1 in 10, we'll give them L-tryptophan. It doesn't quite work as well. You have to do larger doses, but it will eventually work. And typical doses would be, say, 200 milligrams of 5-HTP. Timing is very important here. First dose is taken at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, or right around that time. And the second dose is taken right before you go to bed. Timing becomes critical on these amino acids. Now, a 5-HTP and L-tryptophan are what you call an amino acid. All brain chemicals are made from amino acids. Amino acids are the breakdown products of various proteins. So anytime you eat a protein, you're eating tryptophan, or one of the other amino acids we're going to talk about. But when you take them isolated, all by themselves, on an empty stomach, in a fairly stiff dose, it will start to influence your brain chemistry, and it will start to replete your sagging serotonin levels. How long does it take? Well, it's not as fast as a drug. It probably takes a minimum of 6 weeks to see much of a change. So if I have somebody that's already on a drug, I will have them on this treatment for a good 4 to 6 weeks. And normally, they'll be telling me, oh, I felt pretty good on the drug. I feel so much better now. And then I'll say, okay, now their serotonin levels are coming back. Now we can start gradually weaning them off the medication. Now here's the really cool thing about correcting brain chemistry with amino acids. And that is that it's permanent. Once you're on these amino acids for somewhere in the order of 6 to 9 months, you can withdraw them and your brain will be totally normal for the rest of your life. That's pretty slick. Now that's not true with hormones, by the way. So you'll have to continue the hormones for the rest of your life because your body won't make them anymore. But you will actually balance out your neurotransmitter levels. The second one is catecholamines, so that's the male one, or the dopamine levels. The amino acid here is tyrosine, Tyrosine. The dose is typically in the order of 500 to 1,500 milligrams of tyrosine. And then the timing is important on this. It's in the morning, noon, and around 3 p.m. Now you can take them both. So if you're taking serotonin and L-tyrosine, you're doing morning, noon, and you can combine the 3 p.m. and the 4 p.m. dose with the two of them, and then another one at nighttime for the 5-HTP. Tyrosine is the one for ADHD. This is the big one for ADHD. I can't concentrate, I can't focus, I get too easily distracted. It's wonderful for children that get easily distracted and constantly have to keep moving. So the kids are banging their heads, they're moving their hands, they can't stop moving. You're saying, what's up with that? That constant activity of theirs makes their catecholamine levels go up. And that's why they do it. It's to keep themselves awake. So they're sitting there in the chairs and they're doing this while they're in the school and they're driving everybody nuts. But if they stop doing that, they'll go like this. But you give them some tyrosine. So when you see that kind of thing, that's tyrosine. Again, it's the male, predominantly male it's neurotransmitter. And so when you see ADHD sort of symptoms in men or women, but especially men, you think tyrosine. Let's see, number 4 was GABA. Okay. To treat GABA, you can actually buy GABA. It doesn't work very well. You have to take rather enormous amounts of it. It doesn't get absorbed well through the GI tract. You can use sublingual GABA. But by and large, the best way to influence your GABA metabolism is to take stuff that isn't even GABA. And that would be various herbal extracts. So there are a number of herbal extracts that will bump up your GABA levels better than will actual GABA. Some of these you've heard. Valerian root, which is usually used as a sleep aid, is a GABA medication. Niacinamide, which is a special version of vitamin B3, is to bump up GABA. Now you will notice that all these things I'm mentioning, if you're familiar with the literature, you know these are all used to help induce sleep. Valerian root, niacinamide, theanine, melatonin are all things that induce sleep, and that's because they influence GABA. They relax you. They're not like a sleeping pill. They don't knock you out. They just relax you so you can sort of get to sleep in the normal way. So those are the primary ways to bump up GABA. I forgot to mention St. John's wort. That's what the SJW is. St. John's wort is a potent GABA